Well,
So,
thank you so much again, Professor Sassen. You're back in New York, unfortunately not in Vienna. You are a professor at Columbia University, sociology. I briefly introduce you. And we had the pleasure 6 years ago at the Vienna Art Week with the theme of creating common good already to have you with us with a very important and exciting lecture based on your book back then on
expulsion.
expulsion. Yeah, was wonderful, and things have changed, I guess. Uh, and
Things keep changing.
I'm not sure for the better, but
Yeah.
I'm very curious we are very curious to listen to you and how your perspective on our economy, on our society, on our culture is from a perspective of today. Thank you so much for joining, and the floor
Yeah.
is yours.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, we live in complex systems. I want to start with that notion. Hence, there is enormous variability, and it is not easy to actually capture everything that is happening. So, when you want me to talk about cities, right? Or was there another subject in mind?
The subject matter of Art Week this year is losing control.
Oh, the
Uh,
losing control. Okay.
in
Okay.
that sense, I think you could do like a tour d'horizon in a way,
Yeah.
because it might reach, from back then your book of expulsion to digitalization. We have the COVID crisis.
Okay.
We're analyzing parliamentary systems, the rise of the executive vis-a-vis the legislative
Yes,
branch.
yes, yes. Right.
So I think
Right.
you're touching many topics that are very much part also of our Vienna Art Week, and also what
Okay.
you see at our show. We are sitting here in the middle of a show with more than 80 artists that, from very different perspectives, analyze power, analyze a psychological state of
So
mind,
they're
etc.
artists. You
So
said artists. Artists?
yes,
The
artists, 80
artists. Oh,
artists.
that's great. Well,
Yeah.
I am not an artist. They will pick up on that immediately. That it's a different kind of speech. No, but so shall I just start? Shall I start
Yes.
speaking?
Mhm.
Okay. So in many ways, I think we have entered a new epoch. In complex systems, it is not easy to understand uh, that change has happened because there are so many conditions that are moving, innovations that get inserted in older systems, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, then it becomes an interesting question to ask, how do I know that change is happening when we live in cities and countries where there is continuous movement, continuous change? A lot of stuff that we used to love falls apart, it just breaks down. A lot of what we respected stays on and has a long life. There are multiple modalities in play. And I, for one, really care about recovering that which has a long life, those systems that have long lives, because many many of our conditions simply fall apart, they end, etc., etc. The question then becomes, what is it about those systems that have really long lives and that are still alive, even if it's always partial? In our complex societies, inevitably, we are dealing with partial elements. We cannot handle, certainly not in one sitting, all the complexities that are in play. And so the question then becomes, how do we know when change happens? Because in these types of conditions that I just described, it is not self-evident when something changes, because everything is partly moving and changing a bit. And that which does not move, like walls, is just there. It doesn't have speech in many ways. So for us to detect in our current complex societies where you have such a variability of elements in play, it's not easy to say we have entered a new epoch. And if you try it, for instance, like I tried it, and I believed in it, I said, yeah, we have entered a new epoch. A lot of people will assault you and say, no, that's not right. We are still living in the same epoch. Yes, of course, the walls, the books, the streets, all of that looks like it has been there for a very long time. So the question then is, what is it about a particular moment, like our current moment, that might signal something that is different? And it is not easy, and anybody can destroy the argument that I make or that other people might make. So for me, one indicator is the new generations, because the new generations already have absorbed, the young people, huh? They have absorbed a lot of the stuff, they have made it theirs. So that is already an interesting indicator. You know that, but a lot of it is more or less the same as their parents, or their whatever, the prior generation. So again, you confront this question, well, how do we know that we have experienced change, really real change? And there, I think that there are multiple ways of conceiving of this possibility of we are making change, but they're all partial. It's not like World War I and World War II, in Europe, where, oh God, we know this was a real war. And so, you sort of stay in doubt. And when you think of the really very, very serious sort of launches of very aggressive machinery, et cetera, that was part of those earlier wars, it's almost inconceivable that we would resort today to those types of instruments. In other words, destroying a city. Mm-hmm. So that leaves us with not too many options. So we have to go digging inside the familiar, because the familiar is the books, the streets, all the stuff that is sort of the familiar. And so, and then the question becomes, well, how do we establish a logic that would enable us to know something has changed? So I established a little bit of a logic for myself. Nobody has to agree with it. And one thing that interested me was, given the rise of wealth in many of our big cities, our big cities very often, say after World War II, they were poor. Today, our big cities, they have a lot of wealth. They also have poor people in it, but they have a lot of wealth. So the question then, one possible angle that one might use is precisely, well, what has happened with wealth? Who's benefiting in that? And there we see in some countries, certainly in the Americas, I think Europe is forever more complex and, how shall I put it, more civilized than the Americas. I live in the Americas. I grew up in the Americas. I know them pretty well. There are some very good things, but it really is different. My parents are Dutch. I was born in the Netherlands, so I have that other part of my life too. And you can really see the difference, I would say, between Europe and the Americas. Just to mention one example, we could think of other parts of the world. And the question for me is not so much which is better. It's not that, because these are complex systems with multiple variable elements in play, et cetera. It is rather, how does it function? Does it work for the majority of the people? And here I would say that the Europeans have succeeded much better at maximizing advantage for the young, for the old, for the poor, for the not so wealthy, et cetera, than say what we see in the Americas. In comparison, the Americas are pretty elementary. You have a bunch of very rich people in the major cities, and then you have a lot of miseries, and you have sort of endless size of cities, which means that the poor, the low-income workers have long trips to get to their jobs. So the Americas is famous for having huge, not a lot, but having a huge number of very, very big cities. And that is turning out to be truly a negative. So in there lies a little lesson. And that is, a complex system such as a city should really not be allowed to grow endlessly. Once that is allowed, there will be endless growth at the edges, more and more poor people, low-income people will be living in those edges. And that is not to the advantage of those low-income people, nor is it to the advantage of the city at large. Pollution and all of that. So I would say there again that Europe has known, because it has old cities also, has known how to handle it, with some exceptions, like Paris is a huge city. Clearly, there are some very major cities, but it is still much better than what you see in the Americas and than what you see also in certain parts of Asia, where you have enormously large cities. You really don't want them that large. I mean, it is just not healthy. It's not good. The rich, the privileged, they don't know that it isn't good. Are we there? Is there a problem?
No, fine.
Oh, okay. They don't notice that there is something, that is somehow not right. But in the meantime, at the edges of those cities, we see a lot of poverty. And Latin America is a very good example of that. Latin America has some extraordinary elites and beautiful buildings and I don't know what all. And then when you go a bit further out, you see the miseries, vast zones of misery. I mean, truly exceptionally big. In some parts of Asia, you see that too. But I would say that the Americas are even more dramatic in this type of neglect, if you want, of it all. Now, so that is one sort of issue that one would really want to examine carefully in order to understand that there is something there that is wrong. And one way of answering that question is to keep adding to the size of already big cities is a foundational mistake that will only be to the advantage of those who are rich, those who can handle, can buy, etc., in the good parts. But for the rest of the people, the workers who have to go every day to their jobs and sit in a bus for 2 hours or something, no, that is not good. So there is a natural explanation that captures the negativity of it. And that to me really seems that an important subject, something that we should address. Now, can artists actually add to that? Can their way of thinking, of designing, actually contribute to altering those notions so that there really is a possibility of enabling the disadvantaged, of enabling the poor artists that have to live at the edges of a city, all those kinds of forms of existence and of knowledge making that we care about, but that are often very poor, and they're often confined to living quite a bit away. I do think, again, I repeat, that some of our big cities should stop growing. And
how do you control that?
How would you control that? Are you asking me?
Yes,
I would ask you. It's almost impossible.
Because I used to live in Mexico City and also in Venezuela, and basically it's city planning is out of control, and
out of control. Yeah,
out of control, exactly. And also, if I look at Vienna, for example, we are doing this exhibition with on this industrial site, which is under redevelopment. It will be like basically driven by private investment, just like maximize rental and selling potential. So even in our sphere, I have the feeling that the director of the architecture center here in Vienna, the former director, he once said the last one who was city planning here was Otto Wagner in Vienna. So that was like 100 years ago. And I wonder your claim that, okay, like knowing Mexico for many years, how can you, what would be like from a sociology point of view, a political point of view, where do you see a solution,
Well, it's not easy. This is the major challenge. But I think things have become so extreme in terms of this growing size, in a quite a number of major cities, that there is a possibility of thinking in a different way. And one way of thinking in a different way is that we need to build new cities. Now, therein lies an interesting proposition, which is that there are going to be multiple actors very interested in launching that type of notion. We build cities. In other words, I would say 20, 30 years ago would have been very, very difficult. There was not enough money, et cetera, et cetera. Today, it's so extreme, the condition in some of the major cities, that, from Paris to whatever, that yes, there is an interest in finding an alternative. Now, one key requirement, certainly if it has anything to do with the United States, as I know the United States, is that money, a lot of money. In other words, I can imagine the possible people building the cities asking for a lot of support from the cities. And that is an issue because cities tend not to have a lot of money that they can devote to a novel project, even if that novel project is something that would really enable the city, right? That would
but they at least could institute rules and regulations if there is
exactly. Yeah. But I also do think that keeping expanding our already large cities is good for people like us. But for the low-income workers, it is a very long and exhausting trip, day after day after day. And so I do think that the moment has come, and I can assure you, whenever I mention that, most of the auditorium says no. But I hold to my position, which is that we need to build new cities. That is no easy task. Building a new city is a major enterprise. Expanding an existing city is quite easy, but it is not to the advantage of a lot of the lower income people. So a kind of radicalism needs to come in play, and I also think that the new cities or existing cities too. The famous the 15-minute walk, huh? The Paris notion of the 15-minute walk. That's excellent. That we can all walk and get the basics of daily life, not everything, but the basics. And when you begin to look at it that way, I think you can see possibilities that would engage people, and how far it can go. There are limits to it, but that is a very good initiative. Paris is a huge city, and the notion of dividing it a bit, into reachable zones where from many, many different parts of that huge city, it's not bad. It's not bad at all. Now, you're German, no? You're in Germany or not?
Austrian.
In Austria, yeah, very different. Because I think that Europe just has a better situation in general than the United States. The United States it's more difficult because it has allowed these cities to expand endlessly. And that is really only to the advantage of the privileged. Those who, can live in the center, they don't care. But otherwise, it should not be done that way. But again, I repeat, when I say we need to build new cities, that doesn't move very far. It is really quite astounding. I would have thought that there would be all kinds of entrepreneurs who would have said, yes, nice idea, just to make money. But that could only happen in the United States, not in Europe. But Europe is, of course, better. Europe has a lot of medium-sized cities. That is very desirable.
It's like our pandemic and COVID. Is this perhaps helping in stemming the stream into the cities, and people like in Vienna try to, grab or buy houses on the countryside, because now with digitalization you can control your work also remotely. Is this something that might help in the future?
Yeah, I think that can make a real difference, actually, and also this notion of growing more trees. Europe has always been good at this, but not the Americas. They have been very bad at trees in cities, and so. But now there is a real passion, almost exaggerated passion, for having a lot of trees in the city, which is really nice. You in Europe, you're used to that. The trees were there before. The people arrived, so to speak, and so now in the US, there is an effort along those lines. Central America and South
Especially
America, a bit different.
in New York also, especially. Yeah. I have another question. Remembering your talk back then at the Kunsthaus Vienna, you were really analyzing these expulsions. For
Yes.
example, in an ecological sense, in a financial sense,
Yeah.
in a political sense. That many people really lost control of credit, access to an environment that's still
Yeah.
safe and sane. This was like 6, 7 years ago. How do you look back and
Yeah.
you talked about like ocean, that are completely expulsed in a way that they are completely dead through
Yeah.
plastic waste, etc. Has there been some changes?
Well, the difference is coming, I would say, from the younger generations. It's not coming from us, the elders, but they are putting out a strong voice. Will they succeed? That will vary enormously from one place to another. I would say a city like Paris is far more open to responding to that than, say, a city like New York. I mean, in New York, people don't even try because it is really problematic in that sense. But I think gradually, also with the rise of the new generations, they just have a different perspective. And that's very important. That has happened across the epochs, right? That a new vision of what is the desirable city emerges. Now, the problem is that we have built some enormous, certainly in some parts of the world, enormous cities that are simply unmanageable. When you think in certain parts of Asia, we see that. In certain parts of the United States, we see that. Europe has still kept. I mean, you have some huge cities like Paris, but there's always more of a manageable moment. Sort of Paris then creates the 15-minute city, right, where you can buy your basics no matter where you are. You know what I mean, right?
Yes, definitely.
But that's clearly. And that is clearly and also nice to have a lot of these smaller shops. That is great. In the United States, you just don't see much of that. It is a very different logic that is in play, and it doesn't have the depth of the histories of cities that Europe has, for instance. I mean, that really makes a difference. You have these deep histories. The United States is just different. It just really is. It's another mindset, and it doesn't really understand cities in the sense that you care. It's just different. I don't want to say anything stronger than that, but
okay. Also, recently you also touched on the theme of the rise of totalitarian trends. Even in Europe, like in Hungary and Poland.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Also, in the sense of losing control of our parliamentary system, of fake news and these kind of issues.
I think, to tell you the truth, I don't say this very often, but it's in the public domain, so it's not an issue. But I think we have entered a pretty problematic era, where you have very powerful actors, and you have actors also who want to operate globally, so there is a kind of indifference that comes out of that towards a particular city where you live. If you grow up in a certain city or you are living your life that is very different from being, involved in multiple parts of the world, etc., because you are extracting. So I don't know what is next. But I also think the second item that I wanted to mention is I think that this endless expansion of cities is a real mistake. I already said that. And that should really be addressed. In that sense, the 15-minute city, the Parisian element, is very good because it begins to bring in shops, etc., into the neighborhoods, and that is really important. It's a little intervention, but it makes a hell of a difference to people and to those shops, that you can have those small sort of, it's a return to something very localized that we have long had in our histories, but that was also lost a bit when the big conglomerate enter and dominate everything that is food, everything that is clothing, everything that is everything.
And the rise of the shopping center also in Europe, no?
That's right.
A big problem.
How do the Europeans take that, the rise of the shopping centers?
Well, I can only judge from Vienna, and I have the direct comparison from my years in Barcelona. Barcelona has clear rules how many square meters you can build in a certain distance from the city center. That means that Barcelona still has this local 15 minutes context you mentioned. Vienna, not as much. For example, because at all directions, north, east, south, west, they allowed not Vienna city, but the next state around to build a shopping center. So there are whole streets where there is no infrastructure that you are dreaming of. Certainly, I'm dreaming of too.
And how are people reacting to this?
Also, the city of.
Pardon?
I can. They react with a record number of petitions. There are about 70.
So they're active.
There are about 70, a record number of 70 petitions in Vienna today that are opposed to city planning measures or the loss or the lack of city planning measures. But there's no political response yet. It will be interesting to see how this grassroots endeavors to make it a better city will be eventually heard by the city, and it's not just left to private investors to define how we live, together in this kind of days.
Vienna has a sort of history of quite a significant activism, huh?
Of course, social housing is such a very strong tradition, and still. But many people also, when we built this exhibition here, approached us and told us it's in the area of northwest train station, which was built a century ago by our Emperor Franz Joseph, which was the area of the Danube, basically. And where now it's one of the biggest development areas in the city of Vienna. But if you look at the plans, people tell me it's a loss of opportunity, because it's basically putting a maximum number of housing, which is necessary because Vienna is also growing. But then again, the public space is basically getting lost a little bit in that process.
Exactly. No, that is a pity. Yeah. I mean, the question is, because we will keep on growing the population, except if something extraordinarily dramatic happens, in all our countries, the population keeps growing, quand même, huh? And so we are going to have to invent new formats, I think, because you don't want to. I mean, the problem in the Americas is that the big cities just expand. And, the rich don't care, they're fine. It's the working classes, etc., that have to pay a very high price, getting up at, terribly early hours. So I don't know. I mean, we keep expanding, though the expansion is not very significant, but we keep growing the populations in our countries. How is it in Austria? Has the population grown quite a bit?
It is, and Vienna in particular over the last couple of years, and the effect, again, not only due to the growth of the population, but also by the growth of free capital to be invested. The rental and also the real estate prices were skyrocketing over the last years, and basically again expulsion of people to have a decent living on the long term. Now, there's a big discussion going on in that sense. And
so is there a discussion? Is there a debate going on? Because housing has always been a very significant element in your country, hasn't it? In Austria.
Yeah, there's a discussion going on, but you described in your books, of international financial capital that's moving around and looking for investments. It's very difficult. Vienna and Austria, I think they're still in the social system. A lot of public investment also. Yes. So it softens the effect. It's not like Paris or other cities that a normal working class could not afford to live in the fourth district or third district. So it's a big issue, and also talk about the young generation that will change because we are just holding on to power. It will be interesting how they react in the future because when I talk to young collaborators, it's lots of insecurity in the air. How can we earn and make a decent living, a good life?
But I also, in the United States, we have a lot of the young people want to go to small towns, but nice small towns, which is actually because they are having babies, etc. There are many reasons why, but it is actually a very good move, and those are small towns that can easily handle additions. And of course, the United States is huge, and there are so many small towns. I mean, most of them are truly undesirable. You wouldn't want to live there. But there are also more and more who are fixing themselves up. Americans are very good at fixing themselves up.
Yes, they are always good in innovating, sometimes better than us here in Europe. Saskia, I would like to ask the audience if there are any questions to ask. Yeah. I think we already have to come to a close.
Absolutely.
Are there any questions from the audience? Let's see if there's a chat. You can put it into the chat if you want.
Yeah, whatever, but mention it to me. Read it.
Or you raise the hand and we can open up the mic. And if there's no question, okay. Julia Zwettler, kannst du sie freischalten? Hold on.
Ja.
Ja, du bist schon frei.
Good evening, Saskia. Good evening.
Hello. Hello.
Hello. I have some little question. What do you say about horizon? You say we build cities, yes? And we build cities now on the way to heaven, yes, to the sky. To the sky, for example, Dubai, etc. And
extreme.
Yes, yes. And we build also cities more horizontally.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. What do you think? This difference? Why we want to be on the way to heaven? Why?
Well. Who knows? I mean, we live in a building that is a bit above, I don't know, 5 stories or something, which means that you are a bit removed, from sound, from dirt, it's reasonable. It's not unreasonable. Wanting to live in something that is 25 stories, 50, that is already different. So we have, I don't know if you noticed, but we have built here in the United States, in New York, 2 of these huge towers. One of them is very, very narrow. It goes on and on and on. And at the top, when there is wind, it is moving. Would I want to live there? No. And I think that a lot of the people who bought into those apartments, they did it a bit out of fun, a bit out of standing out, because immediately the media got involved. But it is problematic for a city when you pass a certain height, and these thin towers, they call them pencil towers, these pencil towers, at the beginning we thought, oh, how exciting. Now the excitement is gone. And we see them as trouble, a bit of trouble, because at the top, they sway a bit. You know what I mean by swaying, right?
They're swinging. They're really swinging.
And that... Pardon?
Yeah, they make you dizzy. I saw them in summer.
Yeah. So they have lost their attraction. There is a bit of a return to a more reasonable operation. But the people who bought, I know some of the people who bought into these very, very thin towers. And for them, it was also almost a way of showing off, because those towers, those 2 towers especially, became very famous towers. And so they just enjoyed the attention, which is okay, but that will last about 20 days, and then they're stuck with the real thing. and that won't be so exciting. I don't know. I would not want to live that high up. I don't see the point of it, frankly. And it's also a waste of materials. You know, I don't know. It just must be extraordinarily expensive.
And it's also a sign of too much capital in the market. No, that I'm sure many apartments are simply not taking. They are just bought for park your money.
Yeah, that's right. This is a very important point that I have written a lot about, is to what extent there are all kinds of very fancy houses, I mean mansions, in a city like New York, and they're mostly empty, and they're mostly owned by rich outsiders who use them to store whatever, you know, or to have a claim to store money in the United States or whatever it is. It's not about housing. So I have written quite a bit about this notion that housing is about two items. One is, yes, housing. The other one is housing is a very, very desirable, because it's simple, it's not complicated, way of storing money. Money in a whole variety of formats. I don't mean just paper money. So it is a way of making an investment, et cetera, et cetera. And that we need to take that into consideration. You know, this is way past housing as housing. It really is. So we have a famous street in London, some of you must have heard about it, which is extraordinarily the most expensive part of London. It's full of mansions and full of empty mansions. Some mansions have been left so abandoned that I remember this one where a big tree began to grow from inside the house and went through the roof, etc. Now, these are real mansions. These are not little houses, but it gives you a sense that, and mostly they are foreigners who own those, because who knows what will happen in those countries. You see, they're not sure that their countries are totally safe. And so they say, let's put a bit of our money into a safe place like London, you know. Totally reasonable, really.
In Barcelona, these houses would have been taken over by Ocupas already, I guess.
Exactly, which is not bad. I like that part.
None of
Barcelona enabled, Barcelona helped people to do that. I mean, they were, they were okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Saskia, for joining us, despite your busy schedule. Hope to see you soon again in an analog way here in Vienna. And thank you so much also to our audience. And to our audience, please join us still tomorrow. We have still Vienna Art Week, the last day, and hope to see you at the exhibition. Thank you so much, and good evening. Bye.
Good. Nice talking. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.